This time, the timetable is a bit vague. It just says after these things, and we're reading from John chapter 21, beginning at the first verse. After these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll come also with you." They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish, do you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll find a catch." So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. I like to think that's a bit of humour. Of course, we wouldn't normally put our clothes on to jump into the sea. But here is Peter stripped for work and putting his clothes on and then jumping into the sea. The other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. Well, now, I don't know about you, but 100 yards away is a very long way away if you're out in the sea. I find myself, I have only once swam in an Olympic-sized pool, which wasn't here in London, it was in Swansea. But I was unable to get from one end to the other. I had to pull off to the side, and that's only 50 metres. Could you actually swim 100 metres in the... No, some of you could easily swim 100 metres in the sea, but some of us, it might be a struggle to say we were 100 yards away from land, but that wasn't very far at all. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid, and fish, notice, and fish placed on it. That's not their fish. Their fish hasn't arrived yet. And fish placed on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have just now caught." Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples ventured to question him, "Who are you?" knowing it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread, which he's been cooking on the charcoal fire, and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my lambs." Jesus said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Shepherd my sheep." Jesus said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, Tend my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. If you can just pull verse 20 up, Tom, that would be good. Peter turning round, it's the turning round. Peter, turning round, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I've been using the word immersive to kind of just give a feel for these passages we're looking at on Jesus' resurrection. And immersive really is an encouragement to enter into it as much as you can. And I think if you don't do that for this particular passage, there's such a lot that may miss you, pass you by. There was a chap called John Stott. Some of you may have heard of him. He was in the mid and late last century, probably the most prominent Anglican clergyman in this country, an evangelist traveling all over the world. Thousands of student-age adults became Christians through his ministry. And he came and gave a talk to those of us who were training for ministry once, in which he shared that every day he read 4 chapters of the Bible. But then he said he reads 3 of them and studies 1. And it's that and studies 1. And I would put out to you, since you're all the keen people who are often here in the morning and the evening, reading the Bible is one thing, studying it is another. And that I would want to encourage you, as well as reading the Bible, to actually study it. And to study it, you do need help. And you need to remember that for most of human history, the thing that has been studied more than anything else is God. And that actually, until the 19th century really, divinity was the major subject of study. And all the brightest people in the world studied God. And it would be good if you made use of their resources, both in the past and today, to help you when you read the Bible. Now, I'm sharing all that because I was studying this passage a long time ago and had some, other books and things to help me look at it. And I want to share some of those things with you this evening. But the key thing is the phrase, more than these. So if we look at verse 15 and the ones following, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And the question I was asking myself is, what does more than these mean? What does it mean? Do you love me more than these? And in order to answer that question, we do need to know some other things in the New Testament that relate to this passage. 2 things in particular. Number 1, when Jesus called Peter to follow him the first time, notice that Jesus says to him, this time follow me. It's the second time he says to Peter, follow me. But the first time he said to Peter, follow me, what was Peter doing? That's a general question to the assembled multitudes. What was Peter doing the first time that Jesus called him? Fishing. And he was fishing all night, and what happened? He caught nothing. That's the first time that Jesus approached Peter, and it's recorded that Peter was fishing all night and he caught nothing. What does it say in this story? He was fishing all night and he caught nothing. It's a duplicate story precisely. In the first account, Jesus is on the shore. Where is Jesus here? On the shore. In the first account, what does Jesus say to Peter? He has to shout it, of course, across 100 yards of sea. We could try it, couldn't we? We could have next year, instead of going to Hever Castle, I'm going to suggest a church day out to the seaside, and we could play some games, couldn't we? We could be 100 yards away and see if you could hear somebody shouting from the shore. And Jesus said the first time what? Some of you know the answer to this, I'm sure. If you didn't know, you can work it out from this story. Throw your net on the other side. Throw your net on the other side, and you'll catch some fish. And Peter throws his net on the other side, and they catch lots of fish. That's the first account of Jesus meeting Peter. And this is the last account of Jesus meeting Peter. And exactly the same thing is happening. Have you caught any fish? No. Throw your net on the other side. So they do. That's why John is then able to whisper to Peter on the boat, "It's the Lord." He twigs. This has happened before. It's the Lord standing on the shore. Let's just think about the time before we carry on with that. In verse 14, this is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Well, that's a bit nonsense, isn't it? Because on the first day he appeared to Mary, then he appeared to a group of women, then he appeared to Peter, unrecorded, but we're told that he did that. Then he appeared to two men walking on their way to Jerusalem, to Emmaus. Then he appeared to all the disciples in the evening. On the very first day, there's at least 5 manifestations of Jesus. But here we're told this is the third time that Jesus was manifested to his disciples. So clearly, if you're studying the scriptures, you ask yourself what's going on. And the answer to that is, of course, this is the third collective time of the disciples. The first collective time was on the first day, but without Thomas. The second collective time was a week later. This is now the third collective time of Jesus appearing to 7 disciples, and they're in the north. So it's at least 3 days after the last appearance, because it takes 3 days to walk from Jerusalem to Galilee. It's probably a bit later than that, but it's not 40 days. It's Acts chapter 1, where we're told that Jesus stayed on the earth 40 days after his resurrection. So somewhere between the end of 1 week, I would like to suggest we're probably another week beyond that, but we're not near the 40 days, which is still 3 weeks off. So somewhere in that period, this event is happening. And then we have to say to ourselves, what's the significance of Peter saying, "I'm going fishing"? And I heard a preacher guy say, Peter was giving up. He's waiting to see the Lord. He has seen Jesus. He's seen Jesus at least 3 times because he had a personal appearance of Jesus that isn't recorded for us. We're just told it happened. He has a second appearance as a group of disciples on the same evening. He has a third appearance a week later. But Jesus, where is he now? And the statement, I'm going fishing, may relate to more than these. What are the these? And I would like to suggest to you that Jesus must be gesticulating. He must be waving his arms or nodding his head. And I believe this is a private conversation between Jesus and Peter. Notice that it's after the breakfast. Verse 15, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus then has this conversation with Simon Peter. But notice then in verse 20, Peter is turning round and sees the other disciples behind them. This is not a conversation around the charcoal fire. They have had the breakfast and Jesus takes Peter off. They must be walking along the shore, surely. And I think surely Jesus has his arms around Peter. And Jesus is saying to Peter, Simon, do you love me more than these? Well, what's he doing with his arm? Well, one answer is he could be sweeping his arm over the fishing boat. Are you really going back to your old life? Are you going back to what you were before you met me? Has all of the last 3 years been really not much and now you're returning to being a fisherman on the lake? Do you love me more than these? The life you had before, do you really want to return to that? Do you love me more than these? Pointing to the nets and the fish and the implements of the life he knew before he knew Jesus. Do you love me more than these? But there's other things that feed into this story. Because Peter himself has said, I love you more. And if you recall, Jesus at the Last Supper has a conversation between the end of the supper and arriving on the Mount of Olives. And again, you won't find that out unless you pay attention to the careful details of the word. They've left the room, they're on their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus says, you're all going to leave me, as they're walking along. And Peter says, even though the others leave you, I will not leave you. And Jesus says, really? What does he go on to say? Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. To the man who's just said, I love you more than them. They might leave you, but I won't leave you. And Jesus says, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. So maybe Jesus' arm is not sweeping towards the boat. Maybe Jesus' arm is sweeping towards the fire, where the other disciples are sitting. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these other men? Do you? You can't work out what it means just from the words here in verses 15 or in verse 15. You can't. It doesn't tell you. I did, of course, think, well, if we knew the Greek, we would know then, wouldn't we? These, is it masculine or neuter? Because the Greek language, of course, has a very clear distinction of words between feminine, masculine, and neuter. More than these, men will be masculine, thank you for joining in. More than these things will be neuter, because it's things. So, of course, if we knew the Greek, we would know the answer. I didn't know any Greek. And I was left my room and was just walking out in the street. And as I walked out, I bumped into a young student coming the other way. I can't remember his name, but what I do remember is that he went to the Christian Union, not in the college, in the whole university, and he always wore a three-piece suit. Now, this is a 19, 20-year-old walking about always in a three-piece suit. But I knew he was a classicist. So I asked him, is it possible to tell in the Greek whether more than these is masculine or neuter? To my amazement, he pulled out of his pocket a Greek New Testament, turned to John chapter 1, and unlike me and you reading it here in the English, he read it in the Greek. And then he said to me, we can't tell because it's the same ending in masculine and neuter. But I remember the moment. I've been in my room studying this passage. I go out of my room, I walk down the street, and the person I bump into is him. And out of his pocket he picks a Greek New Testament and tells me that grammatically we can't choose. But spiritually we can, can't we? Because there's a very clear passage where Peter says, I love you more than those other men. There's also a very clear New Testament teaching that the things of the world get in our way in our walk with God. So that actually it could be both. Perhaps he waved his hands round the boat and then waved the other hand round the people around the fire. But I think, of course, the real issue about this whole passage was here was a man who had completely messed it up. Here was a man who said, I'll follow you. Come, follow me, says Jesus to Peter. I'll follow you. And he spends 3 years following Jesus. Here's a man who says, everybody else will deny you, but I won't. And what do we find? The cock crows. And Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. And I think it is an astonishing evidence of God's compassionate love that he knows of what we are made, that John's gospel finishes with this personal encounter. That whoever we are and whatever happens, we have a God who knows. He knows we're human beings. He made us, for goodness sake. He knows the things we're likely to do. And here he has his arm around Peter. And he's obviously pulling him out. Do you love me? And actually, of course, we just have the word love here. But there are a variety of Greek words for love. And Jesus and Peter use different words. And Jesus uses the word agape, which is the highest form of love, sacrificial love. Do you, Peter, have that kind of sacrificial love more than these? But Peter doesn't reply with agape. He replies with the lowest word for love. He's really saying, well, I do love you. I do love you. And the goal of Jesus, of course, is to restore Peter. Look after my sheep. Look after my sheep. Tend my sheep. Follow me. That's obviously the time to stop. Follow me. And brothers and sisters, the whole point about the resurrection of Jesus, of course, is that he is the Lord of all and the Saviour of the world, and he died and rose again for us. And he's not going to give up on us. He will be there to put his arm around us and invite us to come again and walk with him. And he's still going to say, after all the mess, come, follow me. Thanks be to God for his word. Amen. We're going to have a little bit of prayer time because next Sunday evening there's not a normal evening service. If you are coming next Sunday evening, the service starts at 6. There will be refreshments served from 5:45. So you might want a larger glass of wine. Come to 5:45, and we're having our annual meeting. But I thought it would be good to pray together because the annual meeting, generally speaking, I think we better cut it. Goodbye if you're joining us from anywhere else. Thank you for joining us.